Porkins Policy Radio, offering a unique perspective on everything: geopolitics, culture creation, the reality of the world we live in. Coming to you live from New York City, your host, Pierce Redmond.
Okay, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Porkins Policy Radio. As always, I am your host, Pierce Redmond, and you can find this show here at American Freedom Radio, AmericanFreedomRadio.com, as well as on my website, which is PorkinsPolicyReview.com. And if you are new to the show, there are lots of ways to listen. You can find me on iTunes, TuneIn, Stitcher, Google Play, Podbean, Player FM, a whole bunch of other podcatchers as well. I'm also, of course, on YouTube. You can always, download directly from my website, and also here at American Freedom Radio. If you want to support the work that I do, then you can become a subscriber of mine on Patreon for as little as $1 a month if you just go to patreon.com/Pierce Redmond. Of course, that single dollar a month grants you access to the exclusive bonus podcast. I am working on something for the bonus podcast. It's been a bit of a rough month, and I've got some wisdom teeth that need to be taken out. Not right away. It's not going to be until mid-December, but those have been kind of just sort of put a spanner in the works, and it got a little bit behind. But I will put together something for the bonus podcast. It might actually be an interview. I've got to nail down this potential guest, but if not, it'll be me talking probably about the trial of El Chapo here in Brooklyn. So I think that's what it'll be, and I might have a guest for that. I got to figure it out, but I do want to let the listeners know that I've got some really exciting upcoming shows. Next week, we will be speaking with Nick, a.k.a. Artisan Loaf, and we're going to be diving a lot deeper into Elon Musk and his family, and kind of broadening out our last discussion. And we'll really be focusing specifically on Elon and his sort of cult of personality, and discuss the idea, which Nick has sort of put forth, that Elon Musk and the whole kind of like Tesla, SpaceX, this is sort of like the Scientology for the kind of like millennial generation. So we'll get into that. I'm also going to have a good friend and frequent guest on the show, Steven Singular. He's going to be talking about his new book, which is called Stolen Future, The Untold Story of the 2000 Election, which is the nonfiction version of his first novel, In the Cards. And I'm also going to have on good friend Matt Alford, of course, the man behind The Writer with No Hands, Real Power, National Security Cinema. Matt has a brand new book, which he's co-authored, I believe, is with an author by the name of T.J. Coles, and it's called Union Jackboot: What the Media and Professors Don't Tell You About British Foreign Policy. So very excited for that one. I'm not exactly sure when that we'll be recording that one, but it'll be sometime in probably mid-December. Also, hopefully I will have a new episode of Open Minds on Air out just in the nick of time before the end of November, and it'll probably be another episode in our series, Undue Influence in Pop Culture. But I want to welcome back my guest today is Joseph Flatley, and I want to welcome him back on the show. You will remember Joseph, faithful listeners should remember him, from episode 137, where we discussed Joseph's book, Sirhan, or the Hallucinatory Vanguard. Joseph L Flatley, of course, is a journalist and a filmmaker, and you can find all of his you can find all of his work. Of course, now I can't find the webpage up, but I will let Joseph tell us where they can find all of your work, and of course it'll be linked up to in the show notes. But Joseph L Flatley, how are you?
Great, Pierce. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. And remind the listeners, where is it? LennyFlatley.com?
.net. Yeah.
.net. Okay, LennyFlatley.net.
I know. I'm really confusing people. My nickname is Lenny, so like my social media and stuff, it's all Lenny. And
yes, of course.
But my name's Joseph. Joseph looks better in a book. Basically.
Oh yeah, definitely, yeah.
So.
Joseph joins us today to discuss his latest book, which is entitled Satan Goes to the Mind Control Convention, Manchurian Candidates, Recovered Memories, and the Dark Side of Conspiracy Culture. And people might have noticed I was tweeting out the book cover, which is another excellent cover. The Sirhan cover, every time I think I told you this, when I was like reading it at work or on the train, people will be like, whoa, that is just like, what a crazy book cover. What is that? It's like a great conversation starter. And the same goes for Satan Goes to the Mind Control Convention. It's a great image of Baphomet. And it sort of looks like a 3D image without the 3D glasses to give, to give the listeners sort of an idea of it. And I was lucky enough to get an early copy of the book. Is it okay to mention the blurb as well, Joseph?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I yours truly also wrote a blurb for the book, which I have to say, just on as an aside, that to me I was like kind of gushing about this to my girlfriend when you first asked me. I was like, this is like almost cool, if not cooler than writing a book. Is getting to put a blurb on a book. So I'm very excited about that. I can't wait to see, the final product. Joseph, quickly, is the book out, or when will it be out?
Well, I'm thinking Black Friday. Because it's the beginning of the Christmas shopping season, and also, Black Friday.
Sure.
It's the whole Satan worshiper joke there. So, I was rereading the first part of the book today in preparation for the show and found about 12 new typos that I so hopefully it should be out. It should be out on Friday. And if you just go to my webpage lennyflatley.net, you'll definitely see as soon as it's available, or follow me at Lenny Flatley on Twitter, or and contact me through the website, and I'll let you know as soon as it's available. Excellent. You being the Radio Land.
Yeah, and of course, I mean, once it will, I will make sure to tweet it out, for sure, and we maybe we'll put up a little like a post on the website as well.
That would be cool.
Where people can go to get a copy of the book. Well, this is slightly different than your first book. I mean, Sirhan, or the Hallucinatory Vanguard, was a fictional book. And Satan Goes to the Mind Control Convention is nonfiction. So I guess, like, first and foremost, Joseph, what made you, what prompted you to write this particular book, and why nonfiction?
Well, I am a journalist, so that's where I'm most comfortable, I think, is writing nonfiction, but just it's not always easy if you want to do kind of boots on the ground journalism to find when you don't have a contract, or you're not getting paid to write. It's hard to find a subject that you can track and follow it enough to write a full length book, as when you're kind of doing it DIY. But this actual but this subject came to me when I met a couple people involved in the Satanic Temple, and they were talking about something called the ISSTD, which is the International Society for the Study of Trauma and Disorder, and trauma disorders, trauma and dissociation. And basically, it seems like organized medical malpractice. It's like a whole group of people who believe that in recovered memory and multiple personality disorder, and it was just obvious that they were just wrong. And then the fact that this can exist, and like like I said, organized medical malpractice. It was crazy to me. So I found out that they were going to have a convention, a conference in Chicago this spring. So I just jumped up and went and thought, let's see how, let's see what I can do with the story. I pitched it around as like a regular magazine feature, a few places, nobody was interested. So I just thought I'll just keep writing and see how big it can get. And then it got too small for a book, too big for a magazine or for the web. So I just sort of found several articles I'd written in the past and put together kind of an anthology. I found several articles that actually, when I read them, I realized, these are all thematically tied and they all together and they all, kind of comment on each other. So it didn't seem like filler. It seemed like a really good nonfiction project. So the scope changed from specifically the ISSTD to more kind of this weird political moment where right-wing conspiracy theory is very prominent, and it's still marginal as anything, but it's more prominent in the discourse. I mean, when you have the president tweeting out crazy conspiracy tropes, you have to say that it's prominent in some way, even if 90% of the people don't actually believe it. So that's where this book came from, basically. The ISSTD project, and then it grew from there.
No, and again, this should go without saying, I highly recommend this book. I think, and it especially for people that are interested in the sort of ins and outs of the conspiracy culture. People that are interested in the sort of rise of the like right-wing populist arm of conspiracy theory, but even more broadly. I mean, the book also just sort of looks at conspiracy culture and even just sort of conspiratorial thinking and the connection that it has with like American society in particular. And how, we'll talk about this a little bit later, but how this has sort of manifested in the past couple of years, and even as recently as a few weeks ago. I mean, you added a brand new chapter to the book, which we'll talk about probably in more depth in the second hour, focusing on the massacre at the Tree of Life synagogue in Pittsburgh, where you live.
Yeah, I was in the car with my girlfriend coming back from the original Pancake House, and she was looking at her phone and said, there's been a shooting in Squirrel Hill. And then as we started getting closer to my house, we realized that it was this massacre inside a synagogue. So I just, I ran down there, and I mean, it's interesting going back and reading the book now, because until that point, I made a definite connection between right-wing conspiracy theories and danger, but it was more, and violence, but it was more in the context of like Comet Ping Pong and some crazy guy with a gun. But it wasn't nearly as, I don't think I envisioned it as being as horrifying as it could get. And, 11 people dead is as horrifying as it can get. So it was kind of a rude slap. It was like, even I wasn't taking this as seriously as I probably should have been.
Yeah, well, again, because, nobody died at Comet Ping Pong. It's just some dipshit, firing a rifle. Obviously dangerous, but it wasn't like the Tree of Life.
Right. It was just a taste of things to come, a foretaste.
Yes, and I guess maybe very quickly we should sort of because you in the beginning of the book, like in the introduction to the book, you kind of define conspiracy theorist, and maybe we should do that because we're definitely going to be ripping on conspiracy theorists, I think, quite a bit. And I mean, I don't think this should come as any surprise to the listeners out there, but I mean, I don't really mind the having that label thrown at me. I mean, I certainly cover a lot of conspiratorial topics on the show, although I am very open to criticizing conspiracy theorists. And, you have the way you define it, Joseph, is very funny and kind of tongue in cheek, where you're like, you're assuming that conspiracy theorists are reading the book. And you
Right.
say something like, I'm not talking about you, who we're really talking about. But, define in your, as the book lays it out, what a conspiracy theorist is in the context that we're going to be using it.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've been talking around this subject for so long on podcasts and with friends, and even this book to an extent, because it's kind of a hard concept to pin down exactly. But in the context of this work, I mean, conspiracy theories are strictly unproven or unprovable ideas that are believed, absence of any evidence. People come across a crazy notion or not so crazy notion and decide that it feels real. So they run with it. And then, maybe they work backwards and try to find proof, or maybe not. It's really in like the social science realm, or maybe the political realm. It's the analog to like pseudoscience. If you read pseudoscientists, people with that create, I don't know, quote unquote, create zero, energy, it's called, the infinite
free
energy
and
machines, free energy stuff, or people who believe in, I don't know, intelligent design. They start with the concept and then work backward. It sounds very basic, but I mean, it's really just a cognitive glitch that we often do as human beings. So I wanted to be really clear that that's what this book is about. It's not about the idea of that there might be conspiracies in politics. It's not about investigative journalism that maybe people in the establishment don't like, so they label it a conspiracy theory. This is very specifically like pseudo-history, pseudo-science, kind of pseudo-politics, which I think I coined that term, I'm not sure, combined to just, and it's people connecting the dots between things in ways that they wouldn't naturally be connected. And it used to be a left-wing thing, I think. Like during the Vietnam War, the yippies and stuff like that were a lot of people, or Mae Brussel was definitely like what you would call progressive now. But somehow, for some reason, over the last few decades, it's kind of been turned on its head, and now it's like a tool of right-wing politicians, basically. And I just wanted to narrow down the scope to just that. That's what we're talking about.
Right. And again, I think that definition might seem kind of simple on the face of it, but there's a little bit of complexity there. And again, it's this unprovable thing. So, just as an example, and then we'll kind of dive into the book. I mean, you and I have spoken before, off air about the Jeffrey Epstein saga. I mean, that is something you can prove quite a bit. It is you could say, oh, it's a conspiracy theory or whatnot, but much of that is all from court records and things. You can prove all of that. Now, saying that Jeffrey Epstein has a some sort of Kabbalah Satanic Temple on his island because of a blurry, some images on Google. Now, there is something, there is some sort of structure built there, but you can't really prove what it is or what goes on there. And, that's a conspiracy theory.
And that leads to a really good point that I forgot. I hope it's a good point because it's my point, but that I forgot to mention before. It's that conspiracy theory grows in the space where we don't have answers for things. Oftentimes we don't have answers for things just because we didn't crack open a book.
Yeah.
But it's, if you don't have power or you don't have answers for things like there's so much we'll never know about MK Ultra because of the documents being destroyed.
Mm-hmm.
That's why there's so many MK Ultra conspiracy theories, because there's that space there for, creating stories.
Well, and that's a great segue into the first half of your book, or if not really, it's almost like 3/4 of the book is it's sort of, it chronicles your experiences researching the kind of like recovered memory movement and everything that encompasses. So the Satanic Ritual Abuse, the International Society for the Study of Trauma and Dissociation, as well as a prominent charlatan in that particular community who goes by the name Dr. Colin A. Ross, who I believe is probably very familiar to most, if not all, of the listeners. This guy is on numerous podcasts and radio shows. He's authored tons and tons of books. He is the sole expert on MK Ultra and multiple personality disorder, and how basically everyone has been sexually traumatized, and he's sort of one of like the leading, I don't know, figures and pioneers in this particular, pseudo science when it comes to the field of like psychiatry and stuff. And he is a psychiatrist, although I would really I'd argue the scientific merits of what he puts out there. And it like you said, this sort of happened through your meeting some people at within the Satanic Church, and there's a wonderful part in the book where you're hanging out at I guess their headquarters in Chicago, and they go to this like protest and stuff, and and they are actually genuinely concerned that Colin Ross and other people are abusing their patients. And they have these signs about Ross infantilizes women and he's manipulating them, and they genuinely are like concerned that he is taking advantage, and really, in a toxic way, taking advantage of his patients. And at the same time mixing in that it's part of satanic rituals, and I don't want to give away all of it, but you break down the sort of actual reality of like Satanism, which I'm sure people are tuning out right now. We're defending the Satanic Church, but kind of people should really kind of like look into that.
It's the Satanic Temple is the organization, so it's different than like the Church of Satan. This was established in 2012 by this guy Lucien Greaves, and basically they don't believe in a literal Satan. They believe in they kind of choose Satan as their mascot, because he stands up for Enlightenment values and rationality in a world that is increasingly, going backwards towards
Lucifer is the light bringer.
Exactly. So, so they were founded in 2012, and the guy, the co-founder, Lucien Greaves, and if you've seen any videos of the Satanic Temple, he's probably the spokesperson you saw. He was actually, before they cut on this idea of starting the Satanic Temple, he was actually doing really, really good, important investigation and journalism into recovered memory therapy and what they call satanic panic practices. Just because, he probably was turned on to the concept by the fact that, so many people have been hurt and, in the name of like fighting Satanism, but he's been fighting this fight. And then when the Satanic Temple formed, one of their missions is to bring this to light. So it's interesting. It's kind of like almost like the cart going before the horse, it's like right. The Satanic Temple is almost like a media prank being used for their do-gooder mission, and like probably the most important or interesting one is this recovered memory therapy.
Yeah. Oh, and also I'll just throw out too. If you look at like the Church of Satan, or even like Anton LaVey and some of these other characters, true Satanists are actually atheists. They don't believe in God. They don't believe in Satan even as like a literal godlike or magical figure. So again, there's it's really about the whole do what thou wants. I can't remember the exact phrase. That is really that's the whole sort of like satanic. It's hedonistic. It's sort of like a it isn't really about it's sort of a rejection of God in a lot of ways. So
yeah, I call it post-Christian.
Yeah, exactly. So again, there's a little bit more complexity to that, but that doesn't really sell books the way that Colin Ross wants them to sell. So instead, when and I guess we can kind of dive into I think we should look at well, but actually, maybe before we kind of get into Colin Ross exactly, let's take like the ISSTD, because this is sort of one of the big flagship groups, and their ideas are spread around there by people like Colin Ross and others. But I mean, let's just kind of define what their bizarre overarching theory is, because if you go, and this is like I almost like hate to say, this is like a legitimate organization. This is like filled with psychiatrists, psychologists, doctors that are spreading this idea that there are millions upon millions of people around the world that are the victims of satanic ritual abuse, usually being directed by groups such as the CIA. They've also interjected alien abduction theory, which we'll get to a little bit later, into this. But they believe that there are millions of people walking around who have been the victims of CIA-backed satanic ritual abuse, and that these millions of people also possess multiple personalities. And we are not talking about like 3 or 4. We're talking about people having 100 multiple personalities.
I'll
throw it to you, Joseph. If you want to add to that.
Well, it's just really, it's interesting because when you're dealing with a private organization and you're dealing with medical professionals, you're dealing with like patients, it really is kind of a black box. It's hard to know exactly what's going on. The ISSTD, it's a professional organization, so I wouldn't even necessarily say that that there's like a doctrinaire, that it's
there's like a dogma behind them.
Yeah, it's just that the members accept all this kind of nonsense. They have special interest groups, so like subgroups within the organization where people who are interested in certain specialties can study or network or whatever. And they have a ritual abuse special interest group. So they definitely advocate for this idea that that satanic ritual abuse exists and it creates multiple personalities, and it might, so people definitely believe that, and they're networking, and they're not being dissuaded from that at all. And I was curious, like I tried to crash the conference. I couldn't get in, but I spoke to people who attended, and I hung around. I got a room in the hotel and hung around and talked to people for a weekend. And I was very curious to see if like they were going to keep the conversation mostly about trauma and more traditional views of trauma, and then like the craziness was kind of going on with a wink and a nod or behind closed doors. But it's pretty well known and pretty well established. Like basically all the conspiracy theories that we've been talking about are well known and well discussed within the group. So it's definitely like a collection of lunatics. It's not like there are people who are well-meaning and they're just like not getting the dog whistle, so they're getting wrapped up in the organization. I don't know, for various reasons. I'm not sure that actual like okay, in the 80s and 90s, they called it the Memory Wars, which was when lot of people were going to their doctors and coming out thinking that they had multiple personalities, or that,
they had been abused by their parents,
abused by a parent or a satanic cult or a UFO. And one reason for that was because insurance companies were like signing off on those claims. So it was so people were getting paid to create these crazy stories. So it's pretty popular when the insurance companies got out of that, and when there were a few lawsuits that prevented that. It's now become kind of like a much more marginalized, much less promoted thing, but it still exists, and it feeds into this bigger question of like, what are we believing as a society? How can these kind of myths be promoted by medical doctors in this society without people noticing or people doing something about it? Because even if the number of people who are involved in recovered memory therapy are quantitatively less than there was 30 years ago, people are still being hurt, and it's still a gateway to bad science and bad medicine, and it could always get worse again.
Right, and yeah, we should totally just remark on that, kind of hammer that in. I mean, it is not like the 80s and 90s when it was extremely widespread. I was just watching, in preparation for this earlier this morning, I watched an old episode, I think it's from the 90s, of episode that the Fifth Estate did, which is sort of like Canada's 60 Minutes, I guess. And although, because it's Canada, it's actually is like a little bit more like kind of deeper. People are cursing. It's a much more honest sort of television portrait. And this was focusing on the recovered memory community, and particularly Colin Ross and a few other very sleazy psychiatrists in Canada. I recommend people go and watch that, because while, yes, times have changed, it's not as widespread, it doesn't really matter, because, those people, some of them might still be in therapy because of the damage that was done to them 30 years ago. And even so, even if that number is half, or it's a quarter, or it's just tiny little portion of people that are being affected, they're still being affected. And I would also encourage people to go check it out, because you actually see, these mostly women, which we'll get to why it's all women. But you see these women, really breaking down. You see them as victims of Colin Ross and others, and you don't see that a lot. It's like, and maybe we should dive into Colin Ross in particular, because I think he, in many ways, is sort of at the center of this, and he has certainly made a lot of money off of this movement. And it's interesting in a way. You'll see a lot of these the more kind of like wacky conspiracy theorists, people like James Tracy. I lost my job, and Kevin Barrett is the same thing. I was fired for speaking out about the Zionists and whatnot. And that's true to an extent, although they are still making money. Because they lost their, it's like Kevin Barrett and James Tracy are the, they're the professors that, spoke truth to power. So give me money so I can continue. But, Colin Ross is even more interesting, because he's nothing really all that bad has happened to him. He's made a lot of money. He still runs a massive, clinic in Texas. So, I mean, let's kind of dive into Colin Ross. But you want to jump in there, Joseph?
We'll just start at the beginning. Colin Ross was a Canadian psychiatrist based in Manitoba, and then in the early 90s, he ended up, I believe it was early 90s, like 91 or 92, he ended up moving to Dallas. And we're not entirely sure why, but a researcher named George Bergen did a lot of digging around, and he claims that that his abuse of his patients at the hospital where he was practicing was so bad that he basically ran out of the country. Now I don't have anything other than these these affidavits from the internet, and then Roma Hart, who we'll talk about later, she spoke to this as well. So I couldn't really go into it much in the book because I couldn't document it, but that's the story at least. So he ends up in Texas, and he's doing the exact same thing. He doesn't have a clinic. He actually oversees the trauma department in 3 hospitals around the country. So one's in Dallas, one's in Michigan, I think, and the other one's in California. I'm not sure. He'll tell you if you ask him. Right. But so he's got this professional job, and then on top of that, he has been sued multiple times by patients. The ones that we know about are this woman, Roma Hart, we'll talk about it in a minute, and this other woman named Martha Tayo. And the reason we know about these 2 people and we don't know about his other patients is because whenever there's a settlement, written into the settlement is always you can't talk to the press. So there could be 10, there could be 100 other settlements against him. We have no way of knowing. We know about Martha Ann Tayo because her lawyer Chris Barden was really savvy, and he worked to publicize this all over the place prior to the settlement. So she can't talk about it. You can't call this woman up and ask her about it, but the stuff's been established in court documents and in the press. And this woman, Roma Hart, which Colin Ross was seeing up in Manitoba in the late 80s, early 90s. She sued, but her lawsuit ended up being thrown out because of stretched beyond the statute of limitations. So she's talking to everybody. And you talk to Ross, and he says that this woman is basically like a crazy nut job who's being used by people that are out to get him.
Right.
And
you met Colin Ross.
Yes. So when I found out this event was happening, this conference, I called him and talked to him for about an hour on the phone, did an interview, and I have to say, the interview is almost worthless because it's just him ran. Maybe I'm not the sharpest interviewer, but it was just kind of very confusing. It was all conspiracy tropes and then crazy.
Well, because he uses this techno babble,
Yes.
There's a section in the book where you're actually you're sitting down with him in Chicago talking, and he just if people don't get, it's like this weird cult, where Ross is the guru, and he uses this techno babble and nonsense, and people kind of just take that in and then they regurgitate it over and over again. But yeah, it's unless you're in that this closed off world with him at the center of it, you don't know what the hell he's saying. But yeah, he's talking about altars and there's so it's such bizarre language. But I'll throw it back to you.
Oh yeah, Lucien Greaves said that I think he summed it up best. He said that Colin Ross talks like he's always I forgot the term. What's that when you're giving an affidavit or whatever? He speaks in this legalese because he's always couching, and I really think that he's just the smartest man in the room. Any room he walks into, he knows he's the smartest man in the room. So he talks in this kind of
What's this
Professor
highfalutin
Gilligan's Island?
Yeah, but it's bullshit.
Yes.
It's bullshit, and he is also very, I'm glad you brought up this sort of he speaks like he's giving an affidavit, because there's so much of what he says is he knows the law, he knows what he can say and what he can't say, and he knows what can be construed as him being just full of shit. So he's careful about the way he talks, the way he discusses these things. I think he understands the law and how to be litigious. You know, and so, you know, it's interesting, but, you know, he's not going to give away a lot, which obviously, I mean, you know, the sections in the book where it's you and him, I mean, he, like you said, he sort of rambles on about conspiracies and all that kind of stuff, but he doesn't offer up much. And of course, he won't even, you know, give you like a pass to come to the conference. You got to pay him.
Yeah. You know, it's like he hedges, but at the same time, it's like he is emboldened by the fact, I believe, that he's been talking about MK Ultra, and not like the historical MK Ultra, but this weird
Monarch.
Yeah, Project Monarch and stuff for so long, and nobody's called him on it. You know, and I've spoken to like real like researchers in preparing this book who have spoke, you know, and like historians and authors or journalists who have spoken to him, and they don't have a bad thing to say about him. And you kind of press them why, and it's like, well, he's just kind of a known quantity in the conspiracy world, and he's a nice guy, and they don't want to say anything bad about him. But it's like you read his books, and it's like it's disjointed, and it's laughably like disprove, like able to disprove what he's saying. So it's a strange man, and he only exists because nobody cares to call him on it.
Yeah.
Call him on his shit. You know, it's like if he did something that, like, I don't know. I think ultimately he's exploiting sick and damaged people, and nobody in this society sticks up for sick and damaged people.
No, absolutely. And let's get into that, because you know, I think we should lay out what Ross's own practices are, what people who have been treated by him say. Because again, when you hear him, you know, speaking with morons like Jan Irving and others who have, you know, continually promoted Ross, and you see, oh, well, he's got a doctor in front of his name. You know, I at one, you know, for a very brief period was like, oh, okay, well, maybe there is something to this. I mean, he's a psychiatrist. He's written books that, you know, the University of Toronto Press has published. Maybe there is something of value here. But let's get into, you know, the techniques that he uses, because, you know, and again, it's almost exclusively young women. You know, he doesn't treat a lot of men, or any that that we can, you know, when you
I don't know any.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was, you know, and he never really speaks about the, you know, male victims of satanic ritual abuse. It's always young women. You know, if you watch like the Fifth Estate, you know, there's like a type too, blonde hair and pretty, and, you know, I mean, you know, just throwing it out there.
Good insurance.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, that's his whole, or government. Yeah, I guess.
Yeah, that's another thing too. I know he's, you know, he's getting paid by the government to do a lot of this, or he was in Canada.
Yeah, in Canada, you know, but yeah, and that's just real briefly. That's like the mold. It's like 90% of the time, you know, to a great extent, when you're looking at this, it's always male doctors. Although that's changing. There's a lot more female doctors, but the dynamic of male doctor, female patient is very pronounced. And it's kind of like this weird, I don't know, like almost like a weird reaction to feminism on some level. I don't know.
Oh, well,
Bizarre.
and there's just also, I mean, just the mere fact that it's this man. Well, let's get into it. I mean, you go in for a session with Colin Ross, and he, you know,
let's talk about Roma Hart. I mentioned her before, and she's kind of
a great example.
She's the template that I used, and like I said, I haven't spoken to. You know, one of the reasons I put this book out when I did was because I'm hoping to kick up some dust and talk to some other patients or other people that know him specifically, as well as, you know, I know of a lot of people out here that have had this kind of therapy with other doctors, so I understand the template. But I would still love to hear some more Colin Ross stories if anybody has any. But Roma Hart, she was in her 20s. She went to University of Manitoba, and she was like a single parent. She was overworked. She was in school full time. She was working at the Holiday Inn, and basically she went to her the health clinic where she went to school and said, I'm stressed out and I need a doctor to sign off on this paperwork so I can receive unemployment insurance or an extension on unemployment insurance because she was like out of work because she had broken her foot or something. And the doctor within seconds heard her story and said, "Oh, I think you have multiple personalities. We have to talk to Colin Ross." So at this point, the woman's playing along. Generally, the patients aren't playing along, I don't think, but it works either way. She was playing along. She thought she'd pretend to have dissociation and multiple personalities, and then she'd keep getting her check from the government. And almost immediately, Colin Ross had her kind of play acting, like asking her questions about the multiple personalities she had, and like what are their names and what do they do, and just through this play acting, Roma came to believe that she actually had multiple personalities. So you can imagine how quickly it would occur if somebody actually believed that on the outset. But she was completely skeptical, and then along with like these sessions that incorporated guided meditation and just relaxation, and eventually even pharmaceutical drugs, because he is a psychiatrist, she ended up entering this kind of extended state, suggestible state, where he would give her tapes, guided meditation tapes, basically like hypnosis tapes, and she'd walk around listening to these tapes all day and all night. And then she'd start having weird fantasies and what she called flashbacks to like horrible things that were essentially implanted by Colin Ross's quote unquote therapy. And then when he would come in to talk to her, when she would come in to talk to him, she would say, I've been having this fantasy or thinking about that. And then Ross would say, that's not a fantasy. That's a flashback. You're remembering. And then basically they just kind of work together to create this little fantasy world where Roma was, a mind control victim and a ritual abuse victim. And at this point, it's like, does Colin Ross believe this? Does he not believe this? Right. Is he buying his own BS? It's like, I can't claim to read his mind. I don't know. I do know that probably just as many things in this world are done by bad things, horrible things are done in this world by doctors who believe their own BS. So I don't know, but that's Roma's story. And I think that's the basic template of how a person ends up believing that they had trauma in their past, like satanic ritual abuse in their past.
Right, and the Roma Hart's story is interesting because, like you said, she was completely skeptical. She thought it was BS, but whatever. I'm going to do this so that I can get, more unemployment insurance. Mm-hmm. And I mean, this is also like over a year, right? That she was sort of under his spell.
Oh, 6 years.
6 years, okay.
Or 5 years. She went in I believe the end of 86, and then possibly some point in 1991, she left. And you also find when you read these stories or hear these stories, patients do snap out of it. It's like, this isn't, it's like these patients are generally living their lives out and about in the world. So at some point, they kind of start to realize what's happening. And then when they remove themselves from this influence, they realize it's been a scam or that it's BS. But Roma, she was hospitalized several times, actually. So spent quite a deal of time in hospital. So she, so that kind of extended her association with Ross, I think.
And we should also point out like that at one point, I guess that Roma's boyfriend at the time worked for CSIS, which is the Canadian CIA. So of course, Ross got super excited about this, and then started prescribing her, high doses of halcyon, putting her under hypnosis. At one point, he convinced her that she had been impregnated by an alien and had a half alien human child that I guess was then stolen from her. And this really affected her because, she had been trying to have a baby, or she had trouble having a baby. And like, this was just, the thought of like, I had one, but then it was stolen or I gave it up, was like truly traumatic. And yeah, I mean, you do kind of wonder, like, does Ross really buy this? And I think you include it in the end, Roma saying that, that she claims that Ross said to her, I never believed any of it.
Yeah. And, I don't know why Roma would make that up. I mean, I don't know why anybody'd make anything up. But, Roma seems very credible to me and very honest. And it was pretty chilling. She said that he had a grin, like she called it his Elvis Presley grin, and she was like, he was just like, oh, I never believed any of that shit. And, you're actually, there's actually another case, the Martha Ann Tayo case.
Oh, wait, am I confusing that with the baby and the alien?
Yeah. She, well, they both believed that they had, babies that were like bred by aliens. Roma she was told that she had a child that died.
Oh, right.
And that, and then like after the fact, Colin Ross came back to her and said, good news, we found out your child didn't die. Your child actually was taken aboard the mothership and is now working for the CIA and the New World Order. That's what Roma.
Right. Okay.
Which, she points out, you're talking to someone who was a Pentecostal Christian at the time. There's like a lot of
serious implications. Yeah.
Yeah. And then the other woman, Martha Ann Tayo, this is interesting because she's in Texas. So probably like, I believe it's about 10 years after Roma Hart's case, Martha Tayo was in Texas, and she, same thing. She checked into a clinic somewhere. She went to a clinic because of, anxiety. I guess she had a nervous breakdown, and one of the things that she ended up believing was that, she had babies. She had 6 to 9 babies that were like sacrificed by the satanic cult, which she had been trying for years to get pregnant.
Right.
The fact that happened, it's like really screwed with her mind. But so this is the following decade. This is in Dallas, and I don't believe Colin Ross was her like immediate therapist, but he oversaw the department where she was seeking trauma therapy, and she came out believing the same things as Roma, and like Roma's stuff's been documented and in the news media and in legal documents and in, affidavits. And so as this Martha Tayo. So, I mean, just right there, it's like, and he hasn't repudiated any of this stuff. He hasn't, if anything, he's doubled down on his talking about mind control and satanic ritual abuse and, MK Ultra. So it's not hard to believe that he's still up to this.
No, so
yeah. If you're a victim of Colin Ross, give me a call.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. Joseph, we're getting up to the break here, and we'll come back, and I want to. There's a few other little things related to Colin Ross that I want to kind of pick apart. And then we'll kind of broaden this conversation out a little bit more and focus on stuff that in the second half of the book, but. I am joined by my guest and friend, Joseph Flatley. We are discussing his new book, Satan Goes to the Mind Control Convention. So stay tuned, and we'll be right back.
American.
It's practically narcotics.
Freedom.
Oh, yes, I like very much.
Radio.
You're an American institution.
American Freedom Radio.
Have you experienced the miracle of CBDs? They can help you reduce suffering, reduce stress, help you sleep better, modulate inflammation in the body, and is absolutely safe. Meta Hemp Solutions offers a radically innovative approach to CBDs for exceptional results. Stop suffering and reduce your stress now. Isn't it time for a good night's sleep? Stop worrying about tomorrow today. Lab tested for potency, purity, and is non-psychoactive. Free shipping to all 50 states. Try our product risk-free, money-back guarantee. Use code AFR15 to get 15% off. That's Alpha Foxtrot Romeo 15 to get 15% off. Offer ends soon, so visit MetaHemp Solutions today at metahempsolutions.com or call 833-858-7500. Suffer no more. Get rid of the stress and sleep better. Get our product now at metahempsolutions.com. That's metahempsolutions.com. Are the trials of modern-day living getting to you? Feeling tired all the time with no energy? Is proper nutrition a challenge? Having trouble sleeping? All of these evils, sleeplessness, tiredness, poor nutrition, and stress, wreak havoc on our bodies and minds. Enerfood, our incredible organic superfood, has been here to save your life day by day for over 14 years. With the densest nutrition on the planet, Enerfood is filled with 20 superfoods and super herbs designed to cure the evils of modern life. Enerfood will turn you into a superhero, and your family and friends will notice. Don't you want that get up and go feeling you need to seize the day? Why wait? Try it today and start feeling great again. Order now at www.enerfood.com and use the code TR15 for 15% off, or call 866-762-9238 to place your order by phone. Use code TR15 for 15% off Enerfood at www.enerfood.com.
When the weapons of mass destruction turned out not to be true, I expected the American people to rise up. They didn't. Then, when the Abu Ghraib torture thing surfaced and it was revealed that our government participated in rendition, a practice where we kidnap people and turn them over to regimes who specialize in torture, I was sure then the American people would be heard from. We stood mute. Then came the news that we jailed thousands of so-called terrorist suspects, locked them up without the right to a trial or even the right to confront their accusers. Certainly, we would never stand for that. We did. And now it's been discovered the executive branch has been conducting massive illegal domestic surveillance on its own citizen, you and me. And I at least consoled myself that finally, the American people will have had enough. Evidently, we haven't. In fact, if the people of this country have spoken the messages, we're okay with it all.
You're listening to AmericanFreedomRadio.com, the network who perseveres in delivering intelligent debate, constructive dialogue with true independence. The freedom to broadcast the truth is not free at all. So what is American Freedom Radio worth to you? The empowering information with fun, honest and pure integrity behind it provides an example to follow. Friendships to flourish with the moral altruism that pulls no punches. The hosts sacrifice and show remarkable discipline in their duty to deliver quality radio in service to the community with strength, wisdom and loyalty. The founders of AFR wish to thank you personally for sharing your views and insights to make the best radio and alternative media. Now it's time for you to give something back and play a vital role in the future of America. Be as generous with us as we've been with you. Click on the donate banner at AmericanFreedomRadio.com or volunteer by emailing AmericanFreedomRadio@ymail.com. Vaccine, psychotropic drugs and artillery batteries not included.
Launch sequence initiated.
We're now in the approach phase. Everything looking good. Control is good. 5, right, copy. 3, 2, 1, engage.
Prepare your mind to experience American Freedom Radio. Porkins Policy Radio, offering a unique perspective on everything. geopolitics, culture creation, the reality of the world we live in. Coming to you live from New York City, your host, Pierce Redmond.
Okay, everybody, welcome back to Porkins Policy Radio. I am your host, Pierce Redmond. If you are joining us here in the second hour, we are joined by our friend Joseph L Flatley, who is a journalist and filmmaker, and we are discussing his latest book, which is entitled Satan Goes to the Mind Control Convention, Manchurian Candidates, Recovered Memories, and the Dark Side of Conspiracy Culture. And other stories. I forgot that part in the subtitle.
That's a long,
yeah.
unwieldy title again.
Yeah, I think that's good though for like searches and stuff, like on Amazon and other places. I think the more bizarre and long the title is, the better it is for search results. So
good for SEO.
Yes, exactly. And we've been discussing. I hate even calling him Dr. Colin Ross because that again that lends credence to what this charlatan does. But we've been speaking about Dr. Colin Ross and the his practice of basically diagnosing anybody that walks in as having multiple personality disorder. And we were just there towards the end of the second hour. We were talking about Roma Hart and another who's Martha Tayo. Two victims of Colin Ross. And, I just wanted to, again, just kind of like hammer this point home because, I've even seen people that like I respect, pointing to Colin Ross and using, him as some sort of an authority or something like that. Or, it really is like, and you document this beautifully in the book. I mean, just the number of people where they go in for a legitimate mental health problem. Depression, it could be anorexia, it could be anything. There's a whole list of things. But a lot of times it's young women coming in who are depressed. They might be severely depressed. They might be suffering anxiety issues. And, within like an hour, Ross and others, I mean, he's not the only one, but Ross will instantly diagnose them as having multiple personality disorder because of some sort of CIA continuation of MK Ultra. They've been sexually abused, and he begins them on a regimen of powerful psychotropic drugs and hypnosis.
Yeah, the drugs aren't necessary, and I think probably I would not be surprised if most of the time drugs aren't even involved anymore. And Ross claims that he doesn't use drugs because he doesn't need them, which he could be saying anything, but I'm inclined to accept that. I mean,
I think his hypnosis is powerful enough.
Yeah, or just meditation guided imagery. Yeah, absolutely, and. Yeah, so that's it with the drugs. But there was definitely a point where a lot of these cases, misuse of pharmaceuticals is definitely a thread.
Well, yeah, and like you said, I don't think he needs it. And he reminded me, I've been on and off reading this massive book by Frederick Crews called Freud, Making of an Illusion. And it's an extremely critical look at Freud and his contribution to psychiatry and it's a wonderful book. It's definitely worth reading. I'd love to get Frederick Crews on the show at some point, although I don't know if he would be interested in coming on. But there's a whole a big chapter in the book where it talks about Freud's his sort of like internship essentially in France at this famous hospital under the tutelage of Jean-Martin Charcot, who was, he's like the, Colin Ross is like the modern day Charcot in a lot of ways.
I'm sure he'd love it.
Yeah.
He'd love to hear that.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I mean, there's definitely, the concept of repression comes from Freud, to a limited extent. Like what Freud was talking about and later disavowed is nothing like what recovered memory therapists are calling repression. But I mean, there's a lineage there.
Yes.
And even Ross specifically, he talks about psychotherapy, and he obviously, I don't know what school he comes from. I think he just picks and chooses, but I think he draws a lot from Freudian or neo-Freudian school of therapy. And, at one point in his book, he even said, at one point in his case studies, he has a book of case studies called The Osiris Complex. And one of the case studies is a woman he calls Margaret, but is actually Roma Hart. And he says, well, Freudian therapy is essentially paraphrasing. Freudian therapy has kind of failed me. I couldn't do anything for this woman, but hopefully, psychotherapy will advance in years where people like her won't have to suffer. People like her won't have to. And it's like, there's a reason the medical mainstream has completely gotten away from using psychotherapy with schizophrenics and people with those kind of disorders. So just saying that he's using that, using psychotherapy with these people just shows he's just on his own little clinical island, separate, that's completely separate from kind of the mainstream consensus of what a therapist should be doing or not doing.
Well, yeah, and again, back to the Charcot analogy. I mean, he ran this massive hospital that was filled entirely of, quote, hysterical women, and him and others hypnotized these women and abused them, made them, perform sexual acts on doctors and other patients, just experimented, basically pushing the boundary. And, and Charcot he didn't even refer to himself as a hypnotist. He was like a mesmerist, he said.
Right.
And, and this was like Freud just had a fucking, just to use a little Freudian, sexual imagery. I mean, he had a hard on for this guy, like you would not believe. And, he thought this he was a genius, that the idea of hypnotizing women and abusing them was somehow good, and that you could, again, this curing hysteria. And I find so many parallels with Ross and that kind of practice. Because again, you're taking women who are obviously suffering from something, depression, or maybe it is abuse. It doesn't, abuse doesn't have, it doesn't have to be sexual in nature. It doesn't have to be perpetrated for Satan or the CIA. And then what does he do? He hypnotizes them. He implants false memories, and many times he makes them regress to these children. He makes them go back to little 6-year-old Susie and tell me what's going on. And if you watch like that Fifth Estate documentary, there's like a scene where it's Ross in a room with a bunch of grown women that are all acting like children. And
they're rolling around on the floor.
He's making them do things, and it's like, I'm sorry, that's child abuse. Like a grown man who's a doctor making a bunch of women act like children, and there's I can't remember, Joseph, in the book if it was an interview that you conducted or if it was something that you found from another book. But I mean, there was a woman who described it's like being under hypnosis with Colin Ross, and he put his hand on her thigh, and things got a little and it's not like one woman's allegation. There are lots of and rumors and stuff like that floating around about Ross and others, and what they're doing to these women. And again, too, there's something a lot of these women also talk about, and not just with Ross, with other psychiatrists in the same field of repressed memory, that all they're concerned about is the sexual stuff. They want to know the details. What did mommy make you do, and what did uncle do to you? And it's like there's something so perverse and voyeuristic about that. I don't know if you want to touch on that at all.
I mean, I think you said it just as well as anything. No, it's just like, we're kind of veering into opinion, but yes, it's definitely is creepy. And I mean, you watch these women rolling around, it looks like an exorcism. And there's definitely some parallel. There's some like parallel phenomenon, or it's just different flavors of the same phenomenon between like the age regression and like exorcism, but I forgot what I was going to say, but I'm sure it was brilliant, but it's gone.
Well, no, I guess I think if people saw what Ross is really doing to these women, they'd have a very different opinion. And it's also, it's scary because I think, and I want to kind of pick up on this in a little bit, but we've become so conspiratorial as a society and so sort of like contrarian. You always have to disagree with, especially with whatever the mainstream is telling you. That I think it also, even if it's not as widespread as it was in the 80s and 90s, it dissuades a lot of people from getting actual mental health help. And, that's become more and more of an epidemic. And instead, you rely on essentially these dangerous gurus like Ross, who supposedly possess all the secret knowledge and all of the answers, and only his brand of therapy can actually save you and help you. And listen, let's just assume that Ross is correct, and that every other person you've ever met in your life is actually the victim of satanic ritual abuse perpetrated by the CIA, aliens, and the New World Order. These people went in for legitimate depression and things like that. None of them ever had altars prior to those meetings. Now, what if you just never really explored that, but just tried to help them with their depression? Would that be so bad? Yeah. I mean, maybe uncovering all of this satanic ritual abuses isn't really helping these people to become more well-adjusted in society.
I mean, that's been by legit trauma researchers, that's been proven that reliving trauma doesn't do anything other than re-traumatize you. So yeah. So there are many ways in which Ross and the whole recovery memory therapy movement are full of shit. And it actually was a challenge working on this story, because if you're trying to like understand like what the consensus is, or what these people believe, or like how like recovered memories and multiple personalities are supposed to work, you go crazy, because there is no consensus. There is no there's a lot of people like what I had to do basically was say, all right, science and common sense tells me that you're full of shit. Yeah. So like drilling down, doing a deep dive into what you believe or what you're promoting is not necessary, because the onus is on you to prove me wrong. It's like, it's like talking to a flat earther. Like, I believe
you have, right?
Which I have. Well, it's like, I believe the world is round. It's incumbent on you to prove me wrong. I don't need to like go to school with the flat earther, and it's very easy to get twisted around and caught up when you're dealing with conspiracy world, because it is like an alternative reality. I call it a virtual reality, where there are alternate facts. And that's why people get caught up in it, because they have a little impulse or entry, they have a little impulse towards like believing this sort of thing. And then it just, they end up going down that road instead of this road. I don't think conspiracy theorists are crazy or mentally ill. I don't think that because I don't believe in these things that I'm somehow better or smarter. It's just that somehow I didn't go down that road. I'm not inclined to go down that road for whatever reason. And I want to understand why people are inclined, and kind of, get people hopefully people will stop chasing that kind of nonsense. But I mean, it's just, it's just how people think. It's not like, it's like, I don't know.
Here's the thing that kind of like occurred to me when I was reading your book was the this idea that there's all these people that they're going around with these repressed, that trauma, and really I know that Ross, if you kind of asked him, he was like, no, trauma refers to any sort of thing, but really what he's talking about is sexual trauma. That's all he really cares about. That's what everything kind of goes back to, sexual trauma, which you can make your own opinions and assertions about why he's so obsessed with sexual trauma. But what about victims of the Catholic Church? I don't see them having multiple personality disorders, and in fact, they've I don't know if repress these memories is the right thing. They have certainly bottled them up, but you see them coming out 40, 50 years later saying, yes, I was being abused, and I want why are they not exhibiting the telltale signs of multiple personality disorder? Is it because they're all men? And Colin Ross doesn't really care about male victims?
Well, that's the thing. If you look at any legitimate trauma survivor, the shape and experience of their trauma is much different than this kind of game that the trauma therapists are playing with their victims. It's just different things, different phenomenon. One is how kind of you would expect trauma victims to react, and the other is, I mean, it even goes like the age regression, where like you hypnotically like regress somebody, so they're a 3-year-old. They don't act like 3-year-olds. No, they act what like 30-year-old people
think a 3-year-old would be.
Who haven't been around kids too much.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say that too. It's like, when's the last time you've been around a 3-year-old or a 6-year-old? Like they don't act like that.
Right. So.
Oh, I mean, look at what about child soldiers in Congo or Rwanda? I don't see them being, having 50, 60 personalities. I mean, you want to talk about traumatized, growing up in Eastern Congo, fighting in wars, killing and raping your parents. Come on. I mean, so there's also this demographic of mostly young women who have insurance that can pay Colin Ross.
Right. Or
those are the people.
Have cash.
Yeah, or that have cash. Exactly. Yeah. Right. People with disposable income. And then there's just two things I wanted to mention, then we can move on and never talk about Colin Ross ever again on the show.
Sounds good.
Anyone that still thinks this guy is worth his salt, you should really look into his connection to Scientology. So you want to talk about shady connections, and this is Mr. Everyone's CIA. Colin Ross has appeared in videos for Scientology, including the Citizens Commission on Human Rights, which I know some people say, oh, well, they do good work. It is just a front organization to get you into Scientology. That's all it is. It is to get people that might have some legitimate questions about, how much we're giving, drugs and stuff to kids. But CCHR is just there to get you in the door and then to give you auditing courses. And he's also written for Freedom Magazine, which is Scientology's main magazine.
Ross is, in addition to being the smartest guy in every room he goes into, he also tries to be like the most reasonable guy in the room. He's always like talking about, he kind of wants to have it both ways. He's, doing recovered memory therapy, and he's testified in, as a court like expert on multiples personality disorder for for the defense, people that want to get off the hook of like murdering their family. Well, it was a multiple, and Ross can prove it. And but at the same time, he's also testified on the other side against people who have like brought recovered memory therapy into court. One of his books on, I think it was multiple personality disorder. He invited the esteemed memory researcher Elizabeth Loftus, who has nothing good to say about him, to write the afterword of the book. Right. So he's trying to be reasonable. He's trying to just basically, just going wherever he goes. So like when the Scientologists want somebody to talk about the dangers of medicating people, they're going to go to him, and it's a win-win. He gets his ego puffed up a little bit, and they get like a real doctor to.
Oh, and he gets a check too. Believe that he's getting some check from Scientology.
All right.
And I would actually be really curious about his connections beyond that. Especially if Colin, I don't know, but it's with a lot of these experts and stuff with Scientology, it really just becomes a numbers game for Scientology. How many people can Colin Ross get in the door,
right?
At a conference hosted by CCHR? How many of those people then take a free auditing, personality test, and then how many of those people come back and take courses?
Mm-hmm.
Because and again, there's pure speculation, but if that is happening, Colin Ross is getting a cut out of that, because that's how Scientology operates. And then,
very interesting.
The other thing I was just going to say is that, this is Colin Ross, the expert on MK Ultra. First off, he dresses like he is like out of some sort of like cheesy 70s movie on MK Ultra. He wears these disgusting, I can't stand it, those like the short neck turtlenecks. A turtleneck should cover your neck. But he wears these weird turtlenecks and these big gray suits. I mean, he's never heard of going to a tailor and getting a fitted suit. And the practices that he employs are like straight out of people like Ewan Cameron, a real psychopath, Canadian psychiatrist who was under the CIA's or who was at least taking money from them to do experiments.
Yeah, what Roma was going through with the tapes, listening to the tapes, that's psychic driving. That's straight out of Ewan Cameron.
Mm-hmm. So, again, here's my conspiracy theory, and then we'll just leave it there. Colin Ross is just continuing MK Ultra. What if he's part of it? I mean, all of the things he does, this implanting memories, if you look at it in a more critical role, he is doing what he's claiming the CIA has been doing to his patients. So just to throw on my tinfoil hat, it's like maybe it never did end. It just and what better way to hide it than to have it right there in the in the conspiracy culture. And again too, Colin Ross will be like, oh, the CIA is after me. If they were really after him, he'd be fucking dead. Okay, but he's such a joke. That it doesn't matter.
His book, what's it called? The CIA Doctors.
Yes.
Which he gets cited all the time. It is the absolute worst. It is like sub Dave McGowan, like refried, retread, like other people's conspiracy theories, and I don't know. He claims he did FOIA requests and got some astronomical number, 15,000 CIA documents through FOIA that he used as the basis for this book, or 5,000 or something. And it's like,
it's not sourced though anywhere.
Yeah, you don't see it at all. You go through the book and it's all like just the same sources that have been sourced over and over and over, to the point where people started to believe it, not because you can actually follow it to a source, but because it's like been repeated so many times that people just become the truth in conspiracy world.
Right, which is and that I think that's sort of at like the heart of Colin Ross's thing is, and this is not to like to dissuade people who are interested in researching MK Ultra. It is real, or was real. It did happen. I was just at there's a great exhibit. I think it's still up if any of the listeners live in New York, at the Met Brewer, which is the old Whitney building, called Conspiracy in Art, I think. Or the Art of Conspiracy. And there's a great section, I can't remember her name, she's a Canadian artist, whose mother was a victim of Ewan Cameron. And, and she goes into, a lot of the stuff that when he was giving her LSD, when he was basically torturing her. I mean, these are real programs. I mean, they're and unfortunately, like a lot of conspiratorial topics, it gets dominated by the loudest, most asinine voices in the room. And nobody really kind of looks into it. Nobody's really paying attention. No one's really doing anything new. It's like you said, they just regurgitate the same crap, and they get enough people to buy their books, and that justifies writing another one. But I think that's enough about Colin Ross, because he doesn't even deserve as much time as we've allotted him. And I did want to talk about some of the broader issues that you raise in the book, Joseph. And there's one I'm trying to find the exact chapter that it's in. It's chapter 9, which I think is when you're talking about Comet Ping Pong. And there's just a quote that I wanted to just read from the book, and then we'll kind of expand it. But I think it really kind of encapsulates a lot of what you're sort of warning about, especially the dark side of conspiracy culture. And I think this plays into Bowers and what happened at the Tree of Life, which we should get into. But so this is a quote. This is from the book. You say, "Sometimes I think that conspiracy theorists, whether they are consumers of social media fake news or patients of recovered memory pseudotherapy, are the canaries in the coal mine of society. The sensitive souls who are first affected by and who come to embody the tensions that are the inevitable product of our ever-changing culture, with its ever-increasing rate of change. Indeed, in the case of the Satanic Panic, that moral panic that popularized and normalized things like satanic ritual abuse and multiple personality disorder, we can see precisely what cultural forces were at work." And I think that quote is it's great. I love the imagery too, the canary in the coal mine. That's that conspiracy theorists are this sort of like they're on the front lines of how horrific culture and society becomes, and I think they are hypersensitive, and I say that as a conspiracy theorist, and we can be a little touchy and get pissy about things, but I want you to kind of like expand that a little bit, because it's an interesting concept, and it's one that I don't think I've really seen elsewhere. Again, I mean, when people are writing books that are critical of the conspiracy culture, it's always this like they're mentally ill or they're dangerous or they're being puppeteered by the Russians or whatnot. And I think to some extent there's a little bit of truth to that, but I like this idea of them being these sort of like, they're just too sensitive for this world. And that they do, they really absorb all of this like negative energy. And we see that over and over. And I think Robert Bowers is a perfect example of that, but I'll throw it to you, Joseph.
Well, people think that, I mean, Robert Anton Wilson, the great author and conspiracy theorist, he went to great lengths to impress upon people the fact that it's like your beliefs aren't like these rational things that you decide on because you're a rational creature. They're whatever is going on in your personality draws you towards these beliefs, and then you rationalize them. It's like, I think Heinlein said, people are not rational creatures, they're rationalizing creatures. And specifically to conspiracy theorists, I think that there are extreme examples of that. It's hard to, like, if you're like a total normie, mainstream member of, consensus reality, and everybody around you is the same, you live in your bubble, you're going to just assume that everybody is smart, that everybody's right, everybody's smart, everybody's thought about it. You're not going to question it. So when you see a conspiracy theorist and he, says the world is flat, you take notice. I think it's the same dynamic at work, that makes one person a Catholic, or, that makes another person a flat earther.
Targeted individual.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and at heart, these things aren't. These things are communities at heart, like the targeted individuals. I mean, what makes that attractive to people is not like the belief that they're being targeted, which is horrible and traumatic, but the fact that it's a community. You can finally explain your world, and there are other people that understand, and they have a similar story. And even Robert Bowers and his like anti-Semitic posts on Gab, like you look at his Gab profile, and 90% of it is retweets or regabs or whatever you call it, reposts, because he's entered like this alternate bubble, this alternate reality. But more to the point of the canary in the coal mine thing, I just think that conspiracy beliefs are not rationally picked because people have weighed the evidence. I think they're reactions to social forces. Like I said earlier, conspiracy kind of grows in the space where facts don't exist or where facts are ignored. So I think you could probably look at where the world is heading based on like what conspiracy theories are popular. For instance, the Satanic Panic was largely about the role of women in society and the fact that women were taking jobs and putting kids in, daycare for the first time. So I think all of our popular conspiracy theories probably have, stories like that. Victor, I can't remember his name. Jeffrey Victor, he wrote a book called Satanic Panic, and he talks about well, here, I'll quote it. Rumors, allegations, and claims about Satanism may also be a symptom of an emerging moral crisis in American society as a whole, as increasing numbers of people experience the effects of economic stress and family disintegration. If the economic decline of America accelerates as more and more well-paid blue-collar jobs disappear, it is likely that people will fantasize more conspirational threats and seek to find more scapegoats for their anxieties. And he was writing about, the aftermath of the Ronald Reagan years in office, but he could have been talking about the build up to Donald Trump's election just as easily.
Well, I think that there's a great chapter in the book where you talk about targeted individuals, which is like it's like a fascinating topic to me, and that's one that I guess like the flat Earth. I know there was like a big flat Earth convention recently. I saw something like on the Daily Beast writing about it, but the targeted individuals thing is interesting because I remember this was years back when I used to listen to Thomas Sheridan before he became a complete utter joke. And he was talking about the whole gang stalking thing, and it's sort of how I think at the time, he sort of thought it was just ridiculous, and it was like a larger symptom of something, and that was, it was like at the time. I mean, this was years and years ago, and then you cut to like a year or two ago, the New York Times is writing about targeted individuals, and talking about people suffering from this. And your chapter is really interesting. Because you met and you talked with some of these people, and there is, I think the canary in the coal mine thing really works well with the targeted individuals because you point out the fact that like a lot of what they believe is not in and of itself, factually incorrect. We are being spied on more than we ever have been. We're walking around right now with iPhones, which are basically just cameras and microphones that can be turned on at any point in time, that the government can get access to through the NSA and CIA and other things, and certainly, massive billion-dollar corporations can listen to us. But targeted individuals, I mean, they take it to another level.
Yeah, it's like they take the same constituent parts and they build a different theory or reality around it. And the way I got involved in the targeted individual stuff was really interesting because I came across some of the more reasonable, kind of scholarly, sober, not so floridly crazy stuff about gang stalking and targeted individuals. So I was like, I was willing to accept it. I thought, hey, maybe this is,
yeah, right.
So then as I investigated, it got real wacky real quick. And I realized that it's like these people are disturbed, and they're either disturbed or they're just conspiracy theorists. And and they're using what's out there to create a theory, a conspiracy theory, I guess, about reality. And of course you would use Prism and Edward Snowden and transcripts of Democracy Now! And stuff. And
it fits in.
Yeah, exactly. So, but as the world in the United States becomes even more of a police state, it's very odd to see the convergence between these conspiracy theories and what is conspiracy fact, really. I mean, it's not conspiracy, it's just fact. It's just the way it is. Police's intelligence agencies are doing more with foreign or with citizens in the homeland. Police are becoming more like an occupying army, technically and operationally every day. So it's fun trying to parse out what's real and what's like cuckoo land.
Oh yeah, and I think it also it can, again, it kind of dissuades people from looking into the police state, the surveillance state, because it becomes this that's just that nut on the train, that was going on and on about how he's being targeted. I think there's also and maybe this is just, my inner conspiracy theorist just wanting to kind of throw a bone to some of the listeners or the people out there. I mean, I'm not even saying that there aren't people that are being targeted. I'm sure there are. I'm sure there are people that were in satanic cults that were abused. I mean, there's enough fucking fucked up people out there.
Absolutely.
There's enough cult or at least, coercive, high control groups that do abuse people. I mean, we mentioned the Catholic Church. I mean, okay, fine, you just take Satan out of it. I mean, it's still ritual and abusive, what they were doing.
I mean, I think that's kind of the point I'm trying to make is I'm always kind of circling around it, but never quite making it. It's I feel like operationally, it's not necessary to look at the world and create a bigger kind of explanation where one doesn't necessarily, where you don't have proof. It's there are enough injustices and enough horrible things going on that to create this kind of overarching mega conspiracy to explain it does nothing except make you feel better. So it's really, that's where the psychological component comes in. There are a lot of studies, as I mentioned in the book. It comes up all the time. Every 6 months, some scientist explains conspiracy theories. And it's usually pretty condescending. But I mean, really, that's the point of it. Is it's just you're only going to get into trouble, and you're only in for lots of confusion if you take that next step of creating things where there aren't necessarily anything there. I draw from Robert Anton Wilson to call it chapel perilous. It's a headspace that where you're no longer bound by reality or facts or provable things. So while I know that there are deeper things going on behind the scenes, or I just don't feel a need to go there. I think it causes more harm than good.
Well, this is something I've said before, on the show is especially when, with things like Pizzagate and Twittergate and even the unfortunate nature that some of the people that are researching Jeffrey Epstein, the directions they've gone in, abuse of children happens all the time. and it really happens. It happens, and the people who are doing it. They're your neighbors, they're family members, members of your church. It's more likely to happen. Your child's more likely to be abused by someone that they intimately know than getting picked. Like Jeffrey Epstein is like the exception to the rule. It is real. He was doing this. He was trafficking, and probably still is trafficking young girls. But that's the extreme end of it. Whereas the more sort of like everyday end is like it's your spouse. I mean, and I'm not trying to like terrify, but it happens on a much more average sort of level. But people don't want to deal with that. They don't want to deal with the reality that predatory behavior is inherent in people that we interact with every day. It's much, I think it feels safer to be like, no, it's the CIA, it's satanic groups, it's something farther away. It's not, my cousin, or something like that. That again, I think that makes people feel safer. It makes them feel better. And like you said, I mean, it's an issue that's so distant, when there are real issues at stake, right? Like even like with the targeted individual thing, it's like the surveillance state is getting dangerous. It's getting worse and worse. Especially like as technology progresses and we all have these, Amazon Echo and, Xboxes that the microphone never turns off and cell phones and all this stuff. That's scary, but it's almost like it's become so ubiquitous to society that like it's hard to be like, we need to do something really drastic to like curtail Silicon Valley's ability to spy on us all the time.
Right.
That's more difficult, but it's easier to be like they're shooting, auditory, whatever. Like what's the like, ELF weapons and stuff like that.
Yeah.
That's easier, because it's just like it's so far fetched. Joseph, we're coming up. We've got, I think, about maybe somewhere around like 15 minutes left on the show, and I definitely wanted to again kind of return to Pittsburgh and the Tree of Life Synagogue because I think the chapter that you have at the very end of the book really is like a wonderful kind of bookend, and it really kind of puts like a like an exclamation point on the dark side of conspiracy culture and what you're talking about. And I guess I just wanted you to kind of talk a little bit about that in more detail because you actually knew one of the victims of the shooting, Cecil Rosenthal.
And he's just he was like one of those mayor types, or like the honorary mayor.
Yes.
Who kind of talks to everybody and knows everybody. So I just knew him from the bus stop, really. And nice guy. He's developmentally disabled, so he lived in a group home and had his activities that he did during the day, and it's just about town. But I mean, Pittsburgh is like the Jewish community in Pittsburgh is interesting because, like, I think I've been told that in a lot of cities they kind of moved out to the suburbs in like historically, but in Pittsburgh we still have this like great Jewish community in town, and it's not just Jewish, obviously. There's a lot of, but it has a very Jewish kind of
flavor.
Like it's like like the vibe. It's like it's very cool, and people. I'm Catholic, but like non-Jewish people appreciate it, and it's a cool thing. And so it really did feel when this shooting happened like it was an attack on Pittsburgh. I don't know how else to explain it.
Yeah, I never viewed Pittsburgh as like particularly like anti-Semitic. It doesn't strike me as that. And a fascinating thing that I noticed when this happened, and I think this is again, this really kind of goes to a lot of what you talk about in the book is, I saw all of these people, talking about and again, they're all these sort of like, alt-right, alt-light, and just, straight up like right-winger, racist, like Henrik Palmgren and Roosh and, all these other losers. But, and they, or what was it, Black-pilled is like another one of these like just toxic individuals. And they're all, there's something suspicious. It could be a false flag, and maybe it's to malign right-wingers and conservatives, and, it's a gun grab, even though no guns have ever been taken after any shooting, ever. If anything, they sell more guns. And that there's something, as Roosh, that rapist was like going on about, why was it only, old people that were killed? Which is a joke.
Because it was Saturday morning,
Well, yeah, exactly. Right, exactly. It is a Saturday morning, synagogue service. But it wasn't just old. I mean, the person Cecil Rosenthal he was not young, but he wasn't like 98 years old, which is the idea that they were, something like, I don't even know what, like they were implying like that they were like allowed to die because they were so old. And,
it's... Every time this happens, and I don't know why I'm always surprised when the false flag people start going. I don't know why I'm always like taken off guard. But you'll read their stuff, and ultimately they're not saying anything. They're just poking holes.
Yes.
Like they don't have a theory or an idea. They just want to tear down the historical fact. And I mean, and that's the alt-right playbook, is they're not, they don't have anything they want to establish. They want to like tear down the opposing political faction or the opposing political side. Or, in this case, they want to tear down the historical fact of this the shooting happening, just so people are even less sure about what's real and what's not real. James Tracy, he's big in like the Sandy Hook, was a hoax, and Boston Marathon bombing was a hoax. His website had an analysis like within a day or two of the shooting in Pittsburgh, and it was just trying to poke holes in reality. Like I was there, and like. One of the first things they said was, the people on the news didn't seem traumatized, even though they had just been in a shooting. And it's like, on a very simple factual basis, it's because the people on the news weren't in the shooting. The people that were in the shooting were kind of quarantined by the police so they could get their statements. And it was just like a bunch of like
people in the neighborhood,
from the neighborhood, right? Or like one former rabbi of the synagogue just happened to be in the neighborhood when the shooting happened, and people thought that was suspicious. Like he was like a little too glib and too like good at talking to the cameras. And obviously he was like, he was trained and put there, but it's like, no, he actually lived about 2 houses down. He heard the gunshots. So he came and talked to the police, and he was talked to the reporters, and he is like a spokesperson for the Jewish community. So he has his.
But he's a rabbi too. He talks publicly at least once a week
for years.
Yeah,
exactly.
I mean it's the I mean here's the thing, because we're running up towards the end, and maybe if you can we can record a little after show. But
that'd be cool.
The thing that like I know what you mean. It's like it's just like poking holes in like a tragedy, and it's like, but what does it really mean? It's again, I think it comes to that like that sort of like conspiratorial contrarian mentality where it's like, oh well, it couldn't just be that someone's anti-Semitic. That can't exist anymore. Even though the people that are like the loudest in stating that are all anti-Semites. Exactly. Yeah. Like,
I mean, there's like a political motivation, I think. I don't know if Rouge V is sitting down trying to think about how to take down the DNC or anything. But I mean, on a broader sense, there is like a project for atomizing a culture that these people think is toxic and replacing it with their own like crazy toxic culture.
Right. and I know what you mean. It's like, I don't understand. And then it was, they had to kind of like link that to Caesar Sayoc, the MAGA bomber. And, I didn't get that. The other thing too, I mean, I found it interesting that, Caesar Sayoc, that was, had to be, false flag, right? Because the bombs were fake. Even though, I mean, there was Robbie Martin, when, at length kept repeating this. Poorly made bombs are not fake bombs. They're just poorly made bombs. I mean, it's like, and again, it's like they're almost like they're upset that the bombs didn't go off, Mm-hmm. And the other thing too is like, they weren't even, if they had gone, it's like it wasn't going to kill George Soros. It was going to kill, the mailroom guy. Exactly. The same with all of these people. I mean, so what, that would be okay, I guess, or I don't know. But, it's like poorly constructed bomb. It doesn't mean that it's fake. I mean, Caesar Sayoc is a moron, obviously, and he couldn't even just, go to the local library and Google how to make a pipe bomb. But that just because he's an idiot doesn't mean that it's fake.
Right.
And it was fun. I felt it was funny that was fake, but then you kind of jump to the Tree of Life thing, and it was this like, oh no, I mean that was you had half of the alt-right being like, oh God, that's so horrible. This is, again, it's the Democrats, because Donald Trump has done more for Jews than anyone else, and you'd like these crocodile tears from Laura Loomer, who again has put all sorts of whacked out theories about Stephen Paddock, the Vegas shooter. Mm-hmm. But when it comes to this, it's different. And it was this sort of moment of like, where are you going with all of this? I mean, it really is like a road to nowhere. And I think maybe we'll leave it here, because I would love to kind of like expand this conversation a little bit. So I think, Joseph, if you're up for it, maybe we'll continue this, and maybe we'll release this as the bonus podcast.
Bonus, that'd be cool. I can give you about half an hour.
Oh yeah, that sounds absolutely perfect, because there's just like a few more little, there's some tangents and stuff, and I do want to kind of like get into what I found interesting at the crux of this whole Tree of Life thing, and what the right wingers were saying. And the similarities between them and Bowers, I think, are really interesting. Mm-hmm. But very quickly, Joseph, let the listeners know where they can go to find your work, and where they can go to get a copy of Satan Goes to the Mind Control Convention, Manchurian Candidates, Recovered Memories, and the Dark Side of Conspiracy Culture, and Other Stories. If you go to my webpage, lennyflatley.net, LENNYFLATLEY.net, there's a contact form. You can get in touch with me, and there's information about the book and my other book, Sirhan, and there will be links to the new book as soon as it comes out, and it should come out Black Friday, so day after Thanksgiving. And buy one for yourself, buy one for a loved one, and they'll never forgive you. No, and I think, again, I think everyone out there in the conspiracy culture really should get a copy of this book. Read it with an open mind, because I think even if you feel like the truth about all these things, there's a lot in this book that's really worth paying attention to and really thinking about. Well, Joseph L. Flatley, thank you so much for joining us. Once again, you can find all of Joseph's work at lennyflatley.net. Highly encourage you to check out the book. And if you want to hear more of our conversation, then you can always go to patreon.com/Pierce Redmond and become a subscriber for as little as $1 a month. And thank you all so much for listening. Have a good Thanksgiving, and I'll be talking to you all very soon.
no rules, no taboo topics, no fear of doom, We are American Freedom Radio.
Have you experienced the miracle of CBDs? They can help you reduce suffering, reduce stress, help you sleep better, modulate inflammation in the body, and is absolutely safe. Meta Hemp Solutions offers a radically innovative approach to CBDs for exceptional results. Stop suffering and reduce your stress now. Isn't it time for a good night's sleep? Stop worrying about tomorrow today. Lab tested for potency, purity, and is non-psychoactive. Free shipping to all 50 states. Try our product risk-free. Money-back guarantee. Use code AFR15 to get 15% off. That's Alpha Foxtrot Romeo 15 to get 15% off. Offer ends soon, so visit Meta Hemp Solutions today at metahempsolutions.com or call 833-858-7500. Suffer no more. Get rid of the stress and sleep better. Get our product now at metahempsolutions.com. That's metahempsolutions.com. Are the trials of modern-day living getting to you? Feeling tired all the time with no energy? Is proper nutrition a challenge? Having trouble sleeping? All of these evils, sleeplessness, tiredness, poor nutrition, and stress, wreak havoc on our bodies and minds. Enerfood, our incredible organic superfood, has been here to save your life day by day for over 14 years. With the densest nutrition on the planet, Enerfood is filled with 20 superfoods and super herbs designed to cure the evils of modern life. Enerfood will turn you into a superhero, and your family and friends will notice. Don't you want that get up and go feeling you need to seize the day? Why wait? Try it today and start feeling great again. Order now at www.enerfood.com and use the code TR15 for 15% off, or call 866-762-9238 to place your order by phone. Use code TR15 for 15% off Enerfood at www.enerfood.com.
Tell the truth. Don't be bullshitting people. There's enough bullshit as it is. In fact, there's just enough. Did you know that? There's just enough bullshit to hold things together in this country. Bullshit is the glue that binds us as a nation. Where would we be without our safe, familiar American bullshit? Land of the free, home of the brave, the American dream. All men are equal, justice is blind, the press is free, your vote counts. Business is honest, the good guys win, the police are on your side, God is watching you, your standard of living will never decline, and everything is gonna be just fine. The official national bullshit story. I call it the American okey doke.
You're listening to AmericanFreedomRadio.com, the network who perseveres in delivering intelligent debate, constructive dialogue with true independence. The freedom to broadcast the truth is not free at all. So what is American Freedom Radio worth to you? The empowering information with fun, honest and pure integrity behind it provides an example to follow. Friendships to flourish with the moral altruism that pulls no punches. The hosts sacrifice and show remarkable discipline in their duty to deliver quality radio in service to the community with strength, wisdom and loyalty. The founders of AFR wish to thank you personally for sharing your views and insights to make the best radio and alternative media. Now it's time for you to give something back and play a vital role in the future of America. Be as generous with us as we've been with you. Click on the donate banner at AmericanFreedomRadio.com or volunteer by emailing AmericanFreedomRadio@ymail.com. Vaccine, psychotropic drugs and artillery batteries not included.
Launch sequence initiated.
We're now in the approach phase. Everything looking good. Control is good. 5, roger, copy. 3, 2, 1, engage.
Prepare your mind to experience American Freedom Radio.